Capture and replace.
Just got Friday.
number of buildings, but it's well over 100 buildings that we own. See what we can do about the echo. Oh, we have a problem with the sound. You'd like to pause? Sure, that's no problem.
That's funny, Ernie, I can hear you just fine. I can hear you.
No, might be happy to pause and just,
I'd be curious to know how many times the bridge goes up and down and how much divided by.
Yeah.
so it opens every half hour.
Yeah.
And then once it's either early, in the early season, I wish I had the dates, I'm sorry.
What's that?
Yeah,
We're all
thank
set,
you.
okay.
So back to the drawbridge budget, as the question was, the operation schedule, it opens every half hour and on the hour, so half hour, hour. We do track all the boats that go through. There's a tracking system for that. And then early season and late season, it's a required 24-hour notice for us to open the bridge. And we don't have to open it out of season very often. We open it for the Coast Guard. I think UVM has a research vessel. And every once in a while, a big sailboat would like to come through early or late, but it's not very often. In the summertime, on like a holiday weekend, there's every half hour, there's a queue of boats waiting to come under the bridge. It's pretty impressive, actually.
And just quick question on the carry forward line, man. I don't know if this is the line that shows up. It's in the general operating, but the kind of budget book, there was a reversion of 2 point I think $1 million maintenance dollars, and it was carry forward money.
Okay,
Where does that carry forward mean? Because you're saying it's zero, but in our budget, it says that there was a carry forward number of 133,834.
something Deputy Director Atkins, can you help me with that, or do we need to get back to them?
Possibly, we might need to get back to, but I believe that line item carry forward is what will maintenance be carried forward into the next fiscal year for the maintenance budget. So the maintenance specific carry forward.
Yes, and that's what I'm looking at,
Okay,
maintenance specific. And also, if you can get back to me of should breakdown of all the money and how extremely tight your budgets are. Why was there a reversion of $2.1 million?
okay.
That means we had too much.
Yeah, I'd like,
What's been out for?
yeah, and so I would like Director Morse to also, Director Morse from FNA to help us out on the answer to that.
Sure.
question.
Representative Powell.
Yeah, maybe on that same topic and not picking on this budget, but you know, this plowing, sanding, salting, all that is, I mean, is dependent on the weather. In some years, not too bad, other years it's worse.
Mhm.
How do you budget for that? And you know, can you name a time in the last 10 years where there wasn't enough in the budget, and where would you get the additional funds if in fact, you know, we had the snowiest or iciest or, you know, the inches of snow could be how many times? So how is that budget developed? And have you, in the last 5 years, had times when you blew the budget because of the conditions?
Okay, so I'm very certain in the last 5 years, we have not blown the budget. If you start to ask me back farther than 5 and go by memory, I'd be a little bit nervous, but in the last 5 years, we have not blown the budget. I do have a slide that talks about winter maintenance and our overall budget, but I'd happily vary from that to answer the question now. So budgeting for maintenance, it gets very tricky, and we like to call it a plan, but that upsets a lot of people. But it is hard to budget to the dollar for winter maintenance. And I had mentioned I'd been around for 28 years, all in maintenance. And I do have some numbers that I can go off by memory around, if you will, if you don't mind. There has been years that we responded to 40 winter events. And there has been years that we responded to 200 winter events. And so it is really hard to pinpoint to the dollar how much we would spend on winter maintenance. And earlier in the week, I started to touch on it a little bit, that we used to use a 3-year average and it worked really well. And I mentioned that I own a snowmobile and I normally buy a new one every 3 years. The one I bought 3 years ago was in my garage and it is still brand new. It did not move last year, and then nor has it moved yet this year. It looks like now we could have some favorable conditions. But this year we've responded to a lot of little tiny snow events. And a little tiny snow event, I know this is crazy, but it's pretty near the same cost as a 12-inch snowstorm. Because the trucks roll no matter what, and there is cost with rolling those trucks, but the real cost is spreading salt. And so on a 12-inch snowstorm, you plow, and then the minute the flake stops, there's material applied and the roads bear off. If you have a snowstorm that takes all day long and it gives you 1 inch, we've probably applied salt 3 or 4 times. Because that little tiny dusting rolls down quickly into ice, and then there's a zero traction problem, and so we have to salt.
So then, to develop the budget, and I get that, it makes total sense.
Yep.
To develop the budget, you said at one time it was a 3-year average.
We used 5 this year.
So you use 5, you look at the last 5 years, you
Yeah.
know, and so you budget for the worst of that last 5 years, or the average?
Average to the last 5 is what this budget is representing. Yeah.
And for a while, we haven't blown the budget. We haven't had conditions that require us to spend more. Where do the extra funds go? Like, all right, you know, it's now April, you know, it wasn't as bad as it could be. So then, are there maintenance projects that you just
There is.
pile in?
I don't mind. It's
Yeah,
a-
Like
there is.
safety valve, I guess you call it,
And I have some notes here. They were on the last page, but I'd happily talk about it now.
or we can wait either way.
No, I don't mind. I'm actually pretty comfortable talking about this because this is how we do business. So
Yeah.
on the year of a light winter, so say come February and it's looking like we may have a few dollars. This is our only opportunity in maintenance to replace all of our aging small equipment. And we have thousands of pieces and they could range from a chainsaw to a walk behind compactor, a weed eater, a water pump. This is our chance to replace our investments that we have in the district. If we have a bad year, there is no program for that stuff. The last few years, I think probably you folks have noticed traveling on the roads, we've done some significant mow back. We have reclaimed a lot of our land where the trees are encroaching in on the interstate, say, and to me, a hazard tree is any tree that can fall in the travel way. Because until you're on the scene, seeing a mother with injured children because a tree on a Bluebird day fell across the hood of their, SUV at 40 miles an hour. I never thought it that way until I had to experience that one beautiful day in Stowe. And so this is our opportunity to enforce a lot of tree cutting or impose a lot of tree cutting. We do the extra mowing. And then it is one of our only ways that we can replace our cones, our barrels, anytime there's a light year, we don't waste the money. We take it as an opportunity to replace the things that we desperately need to replace in our thing. So the other thing is if we had a little bit of money, say looking at February, we have shovel-ready district culvert projects ready to go. So probably each of those districts on your map, they know their top 20 culverts. And as soon as the ground's thawed, we're replacing culverts. We're doing more ditching. We're buying stone material to be ready for the rest of the year for stone line ditching. So when there's extra money, that money quickly goes into things that we are using to front load the budget, if you will. So we're light on those things in the summer, budgeting for a bad winter. And then if there's a light winter, everything is shovel ready from the fall to immediately start in when the ground thaws.
Thank you.
Representative White has a question online.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good morning, Ernie. On the subject of salt use, and knowing that a number of our waterways have too much salt in them and there's a need to try to mitigate that. I'm wondering if you and your team is aware of or have participated in the Adirondack Champlain Regional Salt Summits over in New York State, where they have seen really significant cost reduction and salt reduction due to kind of new ways to apply salt brine on roads ahead of storms and to use particular types of plows to just be more strategic about how they're applying salt.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to answer that question. So while we have not attended their summit, we are part of the National NASHTO, and Clear Roads program, and we are very active in all three of those programs. Vermont is also considered one of the leading states for salt usage. I wish I had a number, but we are very close to using about 50% less than our sister state, New Hampshire. And I use New Hampshire because when you look at a map, they look very similar. So we have cutting edge technology, and to get into better cutting edge technology, you would have to get into like in Europe, snow fighting, some of their snow fighting tools. If you ever are bored and you look on YouTube, some of the stuff they have is amazing, but they're probably $1 million pieces of equipment, not 250,000. We have, in my time here, we have extremely extended our plowing technology, whether it be with the type of plow with blades Many of our trucks have an after plow, so we have a plow with a straight blade in the front that doesn't flex well. And then behind that plow blade is something that looks very similar to a York rake. It has like 50 fingers, if you will, that bend down. And so if the road has a W profile, those fingers and that secondary plow will make a second windrow. We have sectionized cutting edges now. So instead of the plow just bridging 11 feet, the plow can flex every 3 feet. And the salt technology from when I started until now, it used to be back in the day, I think I heard somebody mentioning it last time we were here, there was a little button in the cab and the salt was on or off. And now it is computerized. It is a poundage per mile. That is reported directly through an AVL system. So if you ask a driver to put down, say, 200 pounds per mile, we know instantly if they put down 800, the minute they touch that button, it's recorded through our GPS system. One of the things I'd like to share when you're driving down the highway, one of the real key uses is if we're using too much salt, you'll see the water off from the edge of the pavement running down through the dirt. That's a lot of salt. And traditionally, very seldom will you see that at V-Trans. Very seldom. That's how I judge when I'm driving, say, down the interstate at 50 miles an hour in a storm or 40, whatever it is, whether they're using too much salt. Is where is that line of meltage? You know, if we're melting snow out into the grass, we are being wasteful. We use liquid salt, and over the years, we have perfected that. We used to use spray bars. We used to go out on the interstate about maybe 15 years ago. It worked some. The timing had to be absolutely perfect. But now by wetting that salt, I started touching on this maybe a couple weeks ago. When we spray liquid salt onto the spinner of the truck, so envision the big load of salt, it's coming out a chute, it goes down onto the spinner. It falls from the spinner onto the interstate. Let's say the truck's doing 30 to 35 miles an hour. That material is moving 30 miles an hour, and salt is a rounded edge marble, really just edgy marble, hits the pavement, and it just rolls like ball bearings into the ditch. So just the fact that we started wetting that salt on that spinner, the nationwide research shows that that's a 33% savings right there in salt for dry versus wet salt. So unless the truck is broken, we don't spread dry salt.
Would you be in any position at all to comment on how many of our municipalities and town crews, et cetera, have access to that level of technology or have had or are incorporating it in their practices?
I only know of personally very few towns that do that, but I am not involved with all the towns. But I will mention, I do know of one town that will never, ever, ever go without the use of liquid salt, and that is the town of Hyde Park. And they are very actively trying to get all other towns on board with this program. And I mean actively. And the road foreman's name is Mark. And he has taken this torch and ran with it. And they might sell it to Johnson. But, you know, please don't hold me right to the fire on that one.
Representative Lally, you had the question too?
I did. I was wondering about the green ash tree problem and how that might be affecting vegetation removal of the trees. I know it's been a big challenge at the municipal level, and I was just.
The emerald ash borer
Emerald
problem.
ash borer, yeah, makes the trees, it kills the trees, and I know from our select board, you know, my select board days, we were told that it makes the trees extremely brittle.
Mhm.
And so we in our town were trying to be preemptive about taking down what looked like sort of healthy trees to avoid this incredible hazard. And so I was just wondering if it has, you know, writ large, I imagine these are challenges for you guys too.
We do have an expert in this topic, and it's not me. And this came through about roughly 8 to 10 years ago. Is that about when it started?
Yeah.
And I do know V-Trans then took a position of if the tree was healthy, we did not cut a tree unless it was dead. But I would prefer to get an expert
Okay.
to answer your question. Are you writing that down? Thank you.
There are a lot of green ash trees in the state.
Yes. All right, we kind of went,
Went all around the place. I don't know how that's gonna impact our timing.
what time do we have until?
11:15.
11:15.
But I don't know how much more you have. If we have to, go longer, we could probably.
I'm gonna speed it, I'll speed it up. So if you folks don't mind, I'll get out of the weeds on that page of accomplishments.
We have lots of questions. Go ahead.
And if you have lots of questions, I can speed up and you can slow me down when you're ready. Would that work for you folks? Okay, so the next slide is district operating. This is the money that is left minus payroll services. And I can jump into the next one. And it says, what's fixed cost? And those are just some slides there. I won't go through them. These are things that are fixed cost. We have to do these things. We have to pay these bills. The next slide says fixed cost. These are each district's fixed costs. These are what their checkbook said that they had to pay for bills. These are not estimates. These are things that were paid for each district. Very factual numbers here. The next slide, it's back to basics. It is a 5-year average. The first 3 in the top left, these are like our core missions that we feel are our back to basic missions. The top 3, we have to do those top 3. Snow and ice control plan, repairing guardrail, and we are required to do a minimum mow, interstate and secondaries. It is.
Was back to basics a theme within the management group or something, or is that?
Back to basics has always been our core mission. And what happened was maybe 15-ish years ago, we started getting farmed out to all sorts of initiatives and this and that. And what about this special interest? And what about this? And what about that? And can you do this? And all of a sudden, we lost sight of our core activities that are very important to the roadway infrastructure. So the back to basics has been around probably for 15 to 20 years. And these things mentioned on this paper are things that have been deemed important that we get done. The top 3, as I was mentioning, snow and ice control, guardrail, and mowing, have to do them. Have to. We have a snow and ice control plan that we have to meet. The guardrail, we have a MOU and a best management practice of how fast we have to fix our guardrail. This is not new installation. This is if there's a crash, there's criteria of whether it has to be replaced in 1 day or 90 days.
Before you move on that slide, I'm going to drag us out a little bit. Because your budget's the way that it is in one larger piece, if we felt that for, say, climate resiliency direction on culvert maintenance and ditching and things that we might want to try to put more resources into, but the way the system is set up now and the way the budget works, we have the ability to as easily influence policy as we might like as the legislature. In other words, how does we, if this committee were to decide under the idea of climate resiliency that we really feel you need to do more in some of these areas, how are we going to make that directive happen?
I would love to get to that. And that is, let's see, where am I here? I think that I am almost there. Do you mind if I just finish the last 2 pieces of paper and then we dive?
If that is
I want to-
what we get into.
I would love to dive into that, and my last page is going to help me a lot.
Okay.
So the remaining operating is each district, so you can look of where you live. This is what leaves them for money after these things that I've presented. Here's the statewide remaining operating. And then if you go to the last page, please, it's a picture of the state of Vermont.
Bernie, what was stenciled?
It's where you roll up to a stop sign and there's a white bar,
Okay.
or you come to a school, there's the yellow sign and it says school.
Gotcha. Okay, and you paint on the ground.
Arrows.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's where we can get into the meat and the potatoes, because I would love to answer that question that you asked. It's a great question. In the past, we came in and we had a MATS budget. And the MATS budget, the problem with that is it showed a little bit of inaccuracy, because what it did was, say we chose snow and ice control plan, instead of a checkbook number, it adds in all of our truck time. And so I'm just going to use fictitious numbers if you don't mind. Say there's $20 million in winter maintenance. You looked at the budget and said, yep, it cost them 20 million. And then you said, maybe we could use 2 million and have them cut more trees. The problem is that huge $20 million number, it includes the heat, the lights, the truck rent, payroll. So if you asked us to move 2 million out of that number, we're not, in order to put $2 million into something else, you basically would need to remove $2 million worth of salt, because that's the only thing that is adjustable, right? The truck rent and the payroll and the heat and the lights and all the fringe is built into that 20 million. And I can't adjust the payroll and the truck rent and the heat and the lights. The only thing I could take out of winter maintenance to equal $2 million would be salt. And that would be a significant hit in that number. Or we could pick any number and do the same scenario. You could pick a huge number. Oh my goodness, you mowed 15 million. We'd like you to stop mowing, do $5 million. And we would love you to do $5 million extra dollars in stenciling. It's not apples to apples is the problem. You take away 5 million from a MATS number, it's not 5 million. So in order for me to actually invest 5 extra million, I would have to take away 5 million in material. If that makes sense to you folks. And that is why I really wanted the opportunity to present this budget this way. This budget is presented in a checkbook fashion. And so the numbers you have, we took the fringe out by showing you what the payroll was and what fixed costs were. So now, if you look at the picture of Vermont, and this is the most important part of my presentation that I'd love to chat about. This picture of Vermont represents each of your areas. And after the heat, the lights, and the 5-year average for guardrail, mowing, and winter maintenance, here's what each district is left on a 5-year average. Like I said, here's what's left for them to operate for the 365 days left. And I also need to speak that that number right there has to cover overtime. And so it's a thin margin. We can do the things that are asked of us for the budget that we have. If it's a light winter, as you folks mentioned, which was an awesome question, that is why we use that money for the extra work, because these numbers, when you start deducting overtime out of these numbers, they don't go in the negative, but it leaves very little money for wiggle room for each geographical area.
If you're saying that the expenses are already in effect heavy in their spot or earmarked or directed, and then you're managing between the activities and that level is there, but does that also mean that if there were additional resources that you wouldn't have the flexibility to put them into the particular projects that they were, or particular areas that we were asking for? In other words, you're saying that every penny is covered, and I'm not disputing that.
Mhm.
If I were to say that you thought we should do more district paving as an example to make up for the last project drop, and I wanted to see more money in district paving,
Mhm.
how do I get it there? If it's sort of already locked in this one number, how do I know? You're saying the only way I can do anything is to increase the maintenance budget. But if I don't have any ability to impact any of the pieces, if I just go up by $2 million in the maintenance budget, how do I know that it gets to the item that I want worked on? Or the priority, the policy? If we set policy, if we set money or we set the direction and the appropriations from here, and it's your job to carry it out.
Yep.
How do I make sure that I can tag resources to a policy if it's got to go through a system that's that rigid, I guess is what I'm consider that is not allowing the flexibility, or somehow I don't feel there's the flexibility to get money to specific areas is what I'm feeling like is work in return. So saying it's already locked down on how the expenses.
Yeah.
If I want to put money into resources and policy, how do I know it gets to that area?
Yeah, and so I think it's a twofold question, and I'm happy to try to answer to the best that I can. So if you asked me to put $2 million of hot mix onto the highway in the current budget, I would either hope for a light winter, we could move money around, or the best comparison that I can come up with is a ton of salt is the same exact price within just a few dollars as a ton of hot mix.
Based on your existing budget, what if you got
Yes.
$2 million more
New money.
new money,
Yep.
new revenue came from somewhere else, and
You
I could
could-
put it on your budget? How do I know it goes? How do I get it to paving?
So we could EA track that and you could get a report to the penny.
So there's been significant road work, roadside maintenance on the interstate and the East Fallen tree radius, and there's been a huge amount of mowing and
Mhm.
et cetera, but that still leaves Route 7, Route 5, or pick Route 4, we've got that network that we've seen as the priority roads.
Mhm.
They haven't necessarily seen the same level of activity or not in that same mowing program, so you might need more resources to make that happen. How do we get it? How would I be able to make that happen? How do I move beyond the interstates and onto some of the other major roads and corridors? How do we make that continued activity happen and more? How do you get the resources to make that happen? If you're through this process?
So I'm not quite,
I'm gonna be able to answer.
okay,
I think I know what you're asking.
yeah, because I am missing something, sorry.
This might be beyond maintenance
Oh.
budget.
Could I introduce yourself, please?
Oh, sorry, actually, I can step you directly. into me. And so this might be beyond the maintenance budget, but if that was to go to the highway division and become a program project with state funds and an EA, then that could get administered to maintenance to utilize this funding, this EA for that activity. And, we've done that before with certain paving projects or certain activities, where it would come through, our highway division that would program that specific project with that specific project description or that would encompass that kind of work.
So as a project, as opposed to the maintenance view of it, it's what percentage? This particular portion, I have to pull it back up. It's a huge percentage of our overall transportation dollars, but it's in one basic line item, and it seems limiting on our influence of how state dollars are appropriated. That's what I'm getting at. But
In the maintenance,
another way that I could pursue in that, but in the maintenance budget.
Yep.
Which is a huge percentage of our overall budget.
especially if state
Our
dollars.
ability as a committee to
Yep.
influence appropriation policy is significantly, potentially some would view as significantly limited. That's what I guess I'm really driving at.
Mhm.
And if I want to see something like this happen, I need to do it more in the direction of a project or have a bigger fight on my hands about how the budget is structured. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think what we're getting down to is, you have a guesstimate, an estimate that you do internally.
Mhm.
You want to take that internal estimates of our budget. And you would probably say no. Well, you have said no. So that way we can dictate, all right, we want X amount to go towards plowing. We want X amount to go towards, mowing and stuff like that.
Mhm.
We can't do that now.
Okay,
So it's probably, like you said, it's not to diminish you, but it's probably a higher level, a Joe Flynn question.
so I hope I haven't said no, because I actually enjoy coming here and talking about what we
Find a
do.
way to put more money into certain areas. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that exactly, but that might be my answer. But it's
Yeah.
also pointing out for the members of the committee that this is civics, 10th grade. We have a role and they have a role, and it isn't always the same. And this is an area of that I'm just highlighting for a while. Please.
Mhm.
Representative McCoy.
So I think, part of the problem is we never really know, like you were saying, well, we could take it from snow removal, but we never know.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a nebulous thing every year. Is it gonna be a bad winter? Is it gonna be a good winter? Is there gonna be money left over? We need to use more salt than we normally historically do. So it's not like, even if we're sitting here right now and we say, okay, we're gonna take this amount of money out of snow removal or salt. And then we have a huge winter next winter, then what? Because we've already done the paving. It was summer paving that we did, and now we have no money. And maybe that's what we should do, because most people are going to the BAA and asking for millions of dollars right now.
Yeah.
And we're not.
And we're not.
Yeah, just structurally, when we, like, if we were to make that a cut, it would be the operations line, so it would just be a general cut to operations.
And
And there's no. You can't point to anything.
we don't want to, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah,
I don't, I'm.
Well, we
speak
got
for
it.
everybody, but I mean, we don't, we may or may not want to do that, I guess is what I'm saying, it's as illustrated, we may or may not be want to doing that, I'm
Yeah.
not endorsing that right
Yeah.
now, but I'm saying. We have a limited impact on some of those areas.
yeah, correct.
A wonderful conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just love it because of the point of the three that I mentioned were 5-year averages and we have to do them.
Yeah.
I feel like doing a 5-year average is not smoke and mirrors, right? Because it's the best of my ability. We have a concrete number for 5 years. And I don't know what's going to happen next year. It might not snow at all.
And I'm not suggesting your method isn't the right one. I'm saying that I'm looking at how those things, these three things that you say you have to do.
Yes.
That was passed in some legislation somewhere that required you to meet your federal standards or to get your federal money or to whatever the different project it was, that was set by some legislator
Yep.
somewhere that became a rule somewhere.
Yep.
If I wanted more rules in some of those other areas, I'm not sure how to make that happen.
Yeah,
That's what I'm getting at.
that's
So that one of those is that direction and one of those is more conversation.
Yeah, that-
The other.
definitely out of my wheelhouse to do that,
But I
but
also want to understand, very much appreciate you illustrating how you decide what to do and what you do with the maintenance and the budget that you have. So I very much, and the idea of where it's split up in the state is very illustrative for where I'm trying to get at. So Representative.
Thank you, Ernie. That was great. Just a quick look at this and being parochial. When I look at the number of miles in each district,
Mhm.
they're rated, District 4 is 904 and District 3 is 813. So that's 1 and 2 right after each other. Yet the amount of money that is allocated in 904 miles, which is the most, gets the most money.
Mhm.
The district number 3, which I hit from, gets rates number 6 in the amount of money.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious how you make those judgments to fund the different districts.
yeah, I'd be happy to. It's one of the slides that I skipped over fast. So I actually am ready to answer you.
But
So we divvy the mileage out, so each district gets exactly the same. It's $6,840.16 per mile.
614, okay.
Yep, and so if you have 1,000 miles and your neighbor has 500, you get double the money.
Yeah.
And it seems to work.
It's because, Vice Chair Shaw is not here, and so we're penalizing District 3.
No, no,
So no, what I'm saying is that District 3 has the second most miles, if I'm reading this correctly. And it gets the 6th most dollars. That's all I'm saying.
District 3,
And
800.
if I could add to that, we also have Route 4 that goes up Pico and up to Killington and down, which uses a massive amount of more salt and sand
Well, miles
and
aren't the same, yeah.
and our mileage is not the same. So when you're plowing Morrisville flat, whatever route runs through there, that's really flat as compared to going up Route 4 and Mendon and all of Route 4 really, which follows the river and it gets icy and everything, and 100 and one, it's all mileage should not be the same because there are differences. And I don't know, that's what I think, because we're going to use more.
That would be quite a debate, right? Amongst all of you folks at this table, I bet.
Especially since some districts have J Peak and some districts have 22A that's flat and straight and getting remodeled, but we're gonna have to cut it off and be able to go to our
Well,
next.
and he didn't, I mean,
I'm sorry.
Ernie can get back to me.
Did you
Yeah.
not?
I want
I'm
to make
sorry.
sure my numbers are correct.
So I wrote 3 and 6 or 3 and 8, you said.
4, and 3 are rated number 1 and number 2 as far as total mileage.
I'm sorry.
But they're rated number 1 and number 6 as far as total dollars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
We will certainly get back to you quickly.
My apologies, Representative. I did let us get off the agenda a little bit, and I apologize for that. And we need to move on to our next group of guests that have come from all over the state to have a chance to present to us this morning. And we know this is the last we will interact with Ernie and his team.
Come back. Speaking with the folks. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wow, we got a whole
Thank you.
all over.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to let you handle all the introductions.
Speakers come.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. How to look at the.
Familiar face back.
No,
that's in
my own spot.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, she trained, she made believe.
Yeah.
Nice.
Ready for?
I am ready. We are, I believe, ready to continue to roll along here on the day. So
All right, well, we'll get going so we don't hold you up for lunch. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear from us this morning. My name is Katie Gallagher. I coordinate the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which is what we're here to talk about today. But I also work with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is a statewide environmental advocacy group on sustainable land use planning and development. So spent a lot of time thinking and talking about the interconnection between transportation and land use in that area. So I'm just going to provide a brief overview of who the coalition is. I know several of you are familiar with the coalition already. And we're going to do a pretty high level overview of our policy priorities for the 2025 session. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues, John Hafner with Vital Communities and Jonathan Weber with Local Motion to dig in a little bit deeper. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end, or feel free to ask questions during our time up here and we'd be happy to answer them. So just a little bit on who the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition is. We come from a broad range of perspectives, including the environment, accessibility, affordability, with transit providers. The folks listed behind me are our advocacy members, but we also have another 20 or so members who are non-advocacy affiliates, but they also help to inform our policy priorities and provide input and feedback on a lot of our work. So there's a pretty broad group. We were founded in 2017 to both kind of address a need that was perceived for transportation advocacy at the state level. But also wanting to raise up the fact that all of these transportation issues are really interconnected, which I think presents a really exciting opportunity, especially when we're kind of in a place of so many challenges that the answer, for example, to the environmental challenges related to transportation are often the very same as those that are related to affordability and accessibility. So that's why we are here. As I said, we touch on a lot of different pieces, facets. We could talk about all of the reasons why transportation is important to our lives, but I think it'd be preaching to the choir. But suffice to say that we try to, again, kind of raise all of these issues as interconnected, and many of the policy solutions that we look towards kind of try to comprehensively address these different pieces of our community. And it's not just us. I'm sure you have seen and will see many different studies coming from the state and other partners across the state talking about transportation as a really critical need from the healthcare perspective, from aging in the state, food security, equity and affordability. And there's more. I just pulled out a couple of these, but this is a topic that comes up in many different areas. So news to no one, the status quo is not working. And so that's why we are trying to think about some solutions. And we know that solutions for transportation in a rural state are really challenging. And so just want to also thank you all for your work on this committee in particular, because it's not easy. The number one priority that we have for this session is overarching, which is sustainable funding for transportation in general. But we've raised up transit as more of an urgent priority for this point in time, because we have been seeing cuts to our transit services, which are impacting many Vermonters. And while I know that you've heard a lot about Green Mountain Transit's challenges, this is not a Green Mountain Transit problem only. Our rural service providers will also tell you that they're also coming up on a fiscal cliff. And so there, as you know, have been several studies over the past couple of years looking both at transit funding specifically as well as transportation more generally. And so we're asking that we take the time to dig into those alternative funding sources more deeply and see what might be able to work. The next priority is related to the state's EV and e-bike incentive programs. These have been very successful, especially those neighbors across the state. I just pulled out the two maps, the EV incentives on the left and the e-bike incentives from, that was just year 2 on the right. These programs lost funding in fall of this past year after we did not receive a grant from the EPA. And so not only is it really critical that we reinstate funding for these programs to make sure that folks have access to clean vehicles, including e-bikes, but also just want to highlight in our conversations with dealers and bike shops and consumers that it's really challenging when we have this kind of inconsistent funding source, both from a funding level and funding that's coming and going. And when you're trying to plan ahead, either for inventory or to make a really significant purchase like a new car, that is really damaging. The next priority is advancing a revenue generating emissions reduction policy tool, which is just the longer way of saying a cap and invest or something similar. This has been on the table for a couple of years and we are particularly interested in looking to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, knowing that transportation is our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, but also wanting to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is raising that revenue so that we're actually providing Vermonters with those transportation alternatives, so that it's an affordable and accessible transportation system. And then finally, improving our street safety so that folks feel safe and comfortable and able to actually use our streets for walking, biking, and rolling. So we've pulled out a couple of recommendations that we think are relatively low-hanging fruit, low to no cost policy solutions. But again, it's really critical that we are designing our streets and investing in our streets in such a way that actually allow people to use them outside of a personal vehicle. So I will leave it there. Happy to take any questions at this point, or I will pass it over to our next guest.
Anybody want to go?
Hey, you might just explain what that ghost bike is. People may have seen them and I don't think everybody knows about them.
So, as you said, this is a ghost bike. This is one of the several very unfortunate deaths that we have seen. I believe this one was
Shelburne
Road.
Thank you. It was on Shelburne Road.
And there have been a couple in the Chittenden area, but also outside. And yeah, so, you know, I think are lucky is not the right word, have pedestrian deaths as places that have greater populations, but we certainly have the same unsafe streets that result in both deaths and serious injury. Fine.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you all for letting me be here. Katie said, my name is John Heffner. I'm a Housing and Transportation Program Manager at an organization called Vital Communities. It's a nonprofit in the Upper Valley, and we operate in 69 municipalities in both Vermont, about evenly split between Vermont and New Hampshire, and we are a member of the T4BT Coalition. I'm going to talk a little bit about how these priorities, how T4BT's priorities are playing out in our region of the state. And to do that, I'm going to give you just a bit of an introduction of what our region is. So we are a bi-state region. We encompass 3 regional planning commissions, 2 on the Vermont side, 1 on the New Hampshire side. Like I said, 69 municipalities. 5 transit providers serve this population. And then within our transportation ecosystem are also advocates and supporters from large and small employers, libraries, educational institutions, healthcare providers, and community-based organizations like Vital Communities. This little squiggly connect the dots map here is our commuter shed. And this is actually an interesting project that was done by a Dartmouth geography professor that had people self-report their daily commutes. And so what this helps us identify is how are people getting around, or where are people going when they're getting around our region? So you can see in the center here, that's the core area of the Upper Valley, which includes on the Vermont side, White River Junction, and
I just was looking at first, is that squiggly line coming down the Connecticut River?
Yes.
Or are we looking at New
Yes,
Hampshire to the right of that?
New Hampshire to the right,
Okay.
Vermont to the
Just
left.
trying to
Yeah,
there.
I'll get you there.
Thank
And
you.
so
Thank
this, the clustery part right there is
It's like
the,
those string projects.
Yeah.
exactly, right, yeah. Yeah, it looks like they're trying to solve a crime
Yes.
a little bit. But so you see most of the activity for trips are coming into the core area of White River Junction, Hartford, Norwich on the Vermont side, and then Lebanon and Hanover on the New Hampshire side. But you can see that people are getting around all over the place. They're connecting to different towns, more rural towns coming to the core, rural towns connected to each other. People need to get a lot of places, and that's what we try to do. Within our partners within the transportation ecosystem is help people get where they need to go. And what we've found is that expanding transit services does help people get where they need to go. And when transit services are expanded, they are successful. So Advanced Transit is our largest transit provider in the Upper Valley. They operate in that core area of Hartford, Norwich, Lebanon, Hanover, bi-state. And they expanded, they're fare free since 2003. They expanded their services to evening and weekend hours in 2022, and they saw that increase their ridership back to pre-pandemic levels. So when you add transit services, people use it and it's effective. It's been effective in our core area where it's more heavily populated, but it's also been effective in our more rural places like the town of Windsor, where Southeast Vermont Transit added micro transit to Windsor and Heartland and the areas surrounding there in 2023. And this graph over here to the side is helps articulate that this was conducted in 2024. The Mount Scottney Hospital and Health Center in Windsor did a community health needs assessment, and they reached out to community members about what they feel has gotten worse, has stayed the same, or have gotten better in their lives as it relates in particular to healthcare. So as you can see, red has gotten worse. Pretty much everything has gotten worse for folks. It's obviously challenging times we're living in, but the one thing that has at least a plurality of improvement has been people are able to get help with rides to healthcare and other services. And I think that this is a direct result of having expanded services from Southeast Vermont Transits in the form of this micro-move service. So again, seeing that when you expand transit services, people take advantage of it and it helps them where they need to get to go and is appreciated. Not only that, it's not just about transit, though. It's that both of these transit services that have been expanded are integrated with other modes of getting around. So that includes micromobility, such as e-bikes and other forms of biking and active transportation. And in our case, in the Windsor case in particular, we contributed pull behind shopping trolleys to their community food shelf. And the micro-move service drivers talked about how that has been incredibly helpful for them being able to provide transportation services for folks who are accessing the community food shelves. As Katie said, transportation and food security are deeply connected. And so these things all work together to help improve the landscape for our community members. The next thing I want to talk about, because obviously it's not lost on our coalition and many others, is that there is an affordability crisis in Vermont. We know that that is one of your key things that you have to deliver upon for your constituents and municipalities across the state. And I just want to, a lot of that focus has been on thinking about where cuts can be made, but I want to emphasize that there are also new possible revenue sources to be generated. And the types of priorities that we're identifying as a coalition actually lend themselves well to improving the revenues of many municipalities. So things like mixed-use village centers in downtown offer more tax revenue potential than urban sprawl. And that includes things that are transit-oriented, walkable, and bikeable. These are the priorities and the things that we want to see as a coalition in our communities. This image here is an example from a research organization called Urban 3 did an analysis of a number of New Hampshire communities. This one is of Lebanon, New Hampshire, again, right across the river from our Vermont service area. And what this shows is that the areas in downtown centers provide the most value per acre when it comes to tax revenue. So this big spike here you see, that's downtown Lebanon. I think if you were to do an analysis of Vermont communities, both big and small, you would see a similar pattern of tax revenues being most potent within these village centers and downtown cores. And those are the areas that where Vermont legislator has supported this approach in land use reform. And I think we need to see that type of support also applied in the ways that transit and transportation infrastructure is funded as well. And so I think that there's a way that we can see transportation and transit address these crises of affordabilities and help when it comes to the tax burdens of Vermonters.
So this is the exit where the hospital is?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So actually, if you see the
So the other one
cluster,
is West Leg to the left.
yeah, that's the
Okay.
West Lead Village Center, and then the cluster to the
And
north
that's
is DHMC. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Finally, I just want to point out that transit is not a new feature of Vermont's landscape. This is an archival image of a 14-passenger bus, perhaps the first version of microtransit within the state of Vermont. This was a bus that would leave White River Junction and go to Lebanon daily. Transit is a part of Vermont's history, and I want you to honor Vermont's history as well as Vermont's future and think about the ways that we can find some sustainable transit funding for our communities. So happy to answer any questions.
What area is your greatest need?
Well, we're to point out that we're concerned about what's affecting GMT right now. While our transit providers may have some secure funding right now, we're worried about what's going to happen in the future. So all those expanded services that we've seen, the gains that we've made, while we're able to hold those right now, we're expecting to start to see the same struggles that GMT in Chittenden County is facing. And so we don't want to see those cascading effects and lose those gains, because people are going to be isolated. People are going to be able to access healthcare, food. We've seen expanded transit work. If things stay, as Katie said, the status quo stays the same, we're going to be facing the same financial challenges in our region that we're seeing in Chittenden County.
Representative Thompson?
Thank you for the presentation. Just to follow up on Rep. Well's question, when's that fiscal anticipated? Is that coming up in this fiscal year or FY 27? Do you have a sense?
I would basically be hesitating to guess. I'm not really sure. And I think it's a dynamic situation, at least for us. Right now, the way that the transit funding works for so transit providers in our area is that it's a combination of state funds on both sides, on Vermont and New Hampshire, and then municipalities contribute. Institutions like DHMC and Dartmouth College contribute, and then there's the formula funds that are passed on through the federal government. My understanding is that it's those funds are the ones that are at risk and that are going to need to be supplemented in some way. We would be obviously looking towards our municipalities and our institutions to help supplement that. I'm not sure when that's going to come into effect in our region, but it's soon.
Yeah, well, thanks for speaking to that. And I hope that we can plan to discuss that more as a committee so that we're not in reactive mode, but we're anticipating this need and preventing people from losing access to core essential services. If we're, waiting until these organizations have already hit that cliff and they're having to face cuts. So yeah, appreciate you speaking to that.
And we just add that if you don't have EBTA, the Vermont Public Transit Association, they can speak in much more detail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Interesting maps, and I love the old picture.
What year is this? Did you find it?
I couldn't find it.
Because 50 cents fare. What are we charging now? $4, that's a lot of money. Consider inflation. And to ride a bus today should probably cost $5.
Somebody tell us what those are in today's dollars.
Yeah, in today's dollars.
How far was that trip?
This is-
White River to Lebanon?
That's not a long way either.
They had to pay the toll person to pull the boat across the Connecticut.
Maybe that's what.
Representative White is on Zoom today and I didn't see her. Let's hear what Representative White has for a comment or question.
Thank you, Chair Walker. Yes, just a quick question on fares. I'm wondering if you could just share, I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion about bringing fares on or not. I continue to question why we're not charging fares on some of these public transit systems so that we can generate revenue to support the ongoing transit systems. And also that, often people don't value something that's free. And when there's a price, whether it's $1 or $2, there's more of a value. So I would just love to hear your input on that. Thank you.
Answer that. You can choose how you would like to.
So in the case of the transit providers in our region, it was just not cost effective to implement fares. They would not be gaining any revenues from the cost that it would take to administer those fares. And then they would inevitably also decrease ridership and therefore would not expect to be actually gaining money from that. So it is more efficient and sustainable for institutions, whether that's municipalities, state governments, or private entities, to support fare-free transit than it is to try to expect a transit company to collect fares in order to sustain their operating services. Obviously, it depends on the context in which that's happening. If you have a higher population, potentially maybe there's revenue benefits to gaining to adding fares, but where we're seeing it's kind of a question of it. Sorry,
is that based on data or is that based on conjecture?
Yeah, and our transit providers could provide more of that information. They have that analysis that's been done, and I think we'd be happy to do so. And again, that would be through the Vermont Public Transit Coalition. Yeah.
Representative Pouches.
I was going to bring up that we'll bring in Vermont Public Transportation Association, and that very logical reason why, and so could Ross McDonald from UTrans explain why it makes sense in an urban environment to collect the money, but in a rural environment, by the time you pay for, people want to use cards or phones, and cash by the time you put in all that infrastructure. And at the end of the route, the driver has, $42 worth of cash. Now that has to go into a safe. Somebody has to account for it all. It just doesn't, it costs more money to collect the money. But we should get a more thorough explanation of the reasoning why. So although it can help the number of riders, I think really it's just the nuts and bolts of the efficiency of collecting money on rural routes. So we'll look to get more explanation on that.
Representative Wells?
How many riders per day?
I have to ask the transit provider that. I don't have that information. I mean,
I don't know how many riders on there. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
14 now.
Oh, that's seats available, right? We'll get into that. I'm sorry, Representative Wells. Are you all set?
Ballpark? Okay.
But yeah, it depends on the route too.
Yeah.
Your ads.
Are we at another spot of presenting, or are we all Q&A at this point, or are we? Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Erickson, and I'm going to just quickly introduce myself. I'm the Executive Director of Local Motion, and my colleague Jonathan will continue with the bulk of the information, but I just wanted to say hello and let you all know about Local Motion. I also want to offer a small symbol of a bicycle pin. And these came from when I attended the National Bike Summit in Washington, D.C. This is a symbol that they call bike partisanship. So no matter who you are, perhaps you ride an accessible bike, perhaps you ride an e-bike, perhaps you ride your trusty old 3-speed, many walks of life and backgrounds, choose a bicycle. And so I leave these for you all as a symbol of that you may choose to share or wear. And Local Motion is, of course, Vermont's statewide bicycle and pedestrian organization. We are celebrating, actually, we just celebrated our 25th year of existence. And in 2012, we became a statewide organization when we absorbed the State Bicycle and Pedestrian Coalition. So we're really happy to be part of the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition. And with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan to get a little more detail about some of our priorities for this year.
Representative Burke?
I just want to say, and you also work closely with V-Trans.
Yes, we do work very closely with V-Trans. A number of our programs are funded through V-Trans, including some of our education and safety programs. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. My name is Jonathan. I'm the programs director at Local Motion. And so I'm very lucky I get to work on a lot of the different things that we do. I get to work on educating kids at schools how to bike smartly and safely, how to walk safely out on our streets. I get to work with our staff and provide technical assistance to towns and volunteer committees in towns to help them be effective in improving their walk bike infrastructure and policy. So a lot of great work that we get to be involved in. And I'll just speak to our mission statement here. We're talking about biking, walking, and rolling. We talk about rolling with sort of an inclusive term for anyone who's maybe using a wheelchair or a walker and doesn't think of themselves as someone who is walking. So just sort of setting the table here, walking, biking, and rolling are really essential modes for a lot of people in Vermont, just like transit, and it's also very interconnected with transit, right? If you can't, if you don't have a safe route to walk from the bus to where you're going or from your house to the bus, then you're going to be challenged to use transit. And as more and more of our population ages out of the driving years, that dynamic is going to become more and more important and more of a challenge for us to address. I'll just share a sad story out of Randolph. A week or so ago, a very elderly gentleman was walking through the downtown along a street near the Amtrak station. There was a gap in the sidewalk in front of a convenience store, and he was walking along behind the cars that were parked in front of the convenience store, and a driver pulled out and hit him, and he sadly died. So very elderly gentleman, and for a lot of people that would have been a survivable crash. But for an older person, it doesn't take much. And so as our state ages, it's really critical that we start to pay more attention and devote more funding and resources to making our infrastructure safe for walking and biking, because even just a small gap can,
So, you say you work closely with V-Trans?
yes.
So I know that when they're going to rehab a road, and if there's enough room, they try to make a bike lane in it. Do they reach out to you at all when they're planning, or is that like just their engineers that are? I mean, I know we had this conversation about 31 up into Cavendish, and they could make a bike path to a point, but then after, I mean, there was ledge and a cliff, and they just couldn't make it. So I didn't know if you were involved in any of those discussions, or?
We are sometimes involved, especially when a project is at the scoping stage, when they're figuring out exactly what the design is going to look like. Oftentimes when V-Trans is doing a repaving project, especially on a rural road, they don't do even a scoping stage for it. Often they will just they'll look at the sector, they'll say, okay, here's what we can do here. Here's the standards that we can bring it up to. Here's the area where we maybe can't reach standards.
Right.
And oftentimes for those paving projects, we're not very closely involved unless it's an area where we're already working in and we're connected with people on the ground who know about the project and maybe want to see it improved. So, and that's how we would often.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Powell?
Are you, thank you, are you involved in the road standards, new road standards that are being developed?
Yeah,
how's that involvement going, I guess?
Yeah, so we're on the stakeholder committee for that. For those of you who don't know, V-Trans is updating its full state design standards, so it's a great opportunity to improve the design specs for walking and biking. It's going well. It's very early stages yet. I think their focus is really making sure that the standards are flexible enough that, for example, when they go into a community that might want their bike lanes on the sidewalk side of the curb instead of on the car travel lane side of the curb, that they can meet that instead of having to say, oh no, our standards are a 5-foot bike lane next to the car lane because we also want a shoulder there. So I think it's heading in a good direction, very early still.
Okay, thank you.
I want to emphasize also, safety is a big part of this, but so is, our push for more housing and affordable places to live. Right, John was talking about that sort of value per acre picture and how our downtowns and our village centers are really where it happens in terms of tax revenue. Most of those places were built before cars were popular, right? And so they're very dense. They don't need a ton of parking lots, and that's part of what makes them so effective from a revenue standpoint. And if we want to build that way again, affordably, without needing to put parking garages in every building, we're going to need to reduce the number of people that are owning cars in those areas. So providing that walking and biking infrastructure is really critical to accomplishing that. Stepping back a minute and looking at some work that was done in the last session, there were several changes to our vulnerable user laws that the legislature passed. So probably the headline there is that legislators decided to require that motorists give 4 feet of space when they're passing a vulnerable user. That's basically anyone out on our streets outside of a car. This is a really important change. It enables us to use some signage shown here that sort of educates people while they're out doing the thing that we're educating them to do safely. And it also makes enforcement possible. So that was a really positive change made last year. I think there's a really great opportunity to look at some regulatory changes again this year. So there was a report that legislators asked V-Trans to put together looking at the operation of bicycles at intersections. So that was submitted back in December. And this sort of looks at changes that a lot of other states and municipalities have made around bikes at stop signs, at red lights, and pedestrian signals, and how to sort of make our traffic regulations match intuitive and safe use of our streets. And so there's some good opportunities there to make things better for people biking that would not have any real cost associated with them. Coming back to infrastructure, our grants are really important for municipalities to be able to build sidewalks and bike lanes and paths like the one shown here on Route 15 in Colchester. That was, of course, a state project, but important for town projects. And they've been oversubscribed for years. Oftentimes, they're getting 2 or 3 times as much requests for funding as they have to give out. And as a result, planners are often reducing the scope of their projects or applying multiple times to get funding for separate segments of a single project. And this is obviously pretty tough from a staff capacity standpoint. It just means projects take a lot longer to deliver. So if we're going to build out these safe networks, we really need to support it with funding.
It's one of the, sorry, John, one of the areas that we struggle and we look at in terms of, or I'm struggling in terms of where our transportation revenues come from. You know, a full user fees pay for through registration, through gas tax, bringing the majority of the money into the transportation fund. And as you mentioned, as the aging population, the amount of cars goes down, the amount of gas tax goes down, the amount of revenue that we have to support it. I do believe that the committee was very receptive to helping the bikers and that you guys have been here multiple years. We talk about downtowns, we talk about crosswalks, we've heard about the signals that we work on, we've heard about a lot of stuff that we do. And a huge amount across the entire agency has really adjusted their thinking from what I've been told over the last, some people in this committee have done a lot of work to get the agency to help them change. And they're incredibly bike friendly, let's say, in comparison, maybe not as much as you'd like, but compared to where they were. All of that is paid for by users of a totally different mode than what you're talking about. And there's numbers, from my understanding, is in the millions and millions of dollars are considered on every project, every lane, every piece. So we're massively investing in this now, but where does the revenue come from as we continue to grow this? What does the biking community, the rolling community, where does the revenue come from that helps support it? When we learn, like earlier today, this is what I'm just letting you know where I'm coming from, and that we learned earlier today, of course, that we are dropping significantly the amount of lanes, miles being able to be paved, and as our revenues grow only less than 2% in transportation, and our expenses are going up in the 30 and 40%. We in this committee are incredibly supportive of all of these type of projects. Where, if we don't want to charge fares on regional, rural, and we don't want to have a bike, or maybe we do a bike registration fee, where does this community piece help contribute back to the transportation dollars that are being supported in the millions of dollars on every project? That's a rub for me in terms of, I'm totally on board. I love our bike path. I wish our town would do more with it, all of those kind of things. But I'm struggling with the users that are paying for their roads, and we're potentially dramatically cutting back on our quality. So how do we find another revenue source to help continue to fund all of the amazing work that has been done in this area and is obviously a need or a want that people want more? So I want to be very clear that I like all of the direction, the livability. I love the bike paths that are out there, but I'm also we are facing a pretty substantial drop in transportation revenues. Where does the revenue come out of the areas that you're advocating for today, both in public transit and in bike path? How do they help us solve this revenue problem?
Yeah, well, I think, there is a clear need to solve the transportation revenue issue in general. And Katie spoke to that a little bit during her slides. So I think there's a bigger conversation to be had about that. I think it's important to recognize that, especially when we're building out our transportation networks for walking and biking, we're often doing so in a way that reduces the amount of driving. And that often means that we don't need to build that extra lane at this intersection or along this state highway. And so we're saving money oftentimes because of bike lanes.
We reduce that driving. We're also reducing the amount of gas tax that comes in and the amount of registration. We're reducing the very revenue that's reducing, there's a bit of and I appreciate your nod, because I see your name on all kinds of emails that I get and read through. And I'm a big supporter of that bike path through the Colchester, love all that. But there's no revenue to support the activities of what you're talking about. And we're doing it because we all believe in the bigger livability picture that many of our reps talk about. But I'm asking you, or suggesting, help me find a way to show that it's not just a take, there is a give. And that's, I guess, my opportunity to say that. I apologize, we'll give another couple more minutes, but we are a little bit behind. And that's a big topic, and I don't expect we're going to answer here. Maybe we'll have more time, but I do think that your area is very well received in the committee, and that we are making progress, but we are facing a huge question. So Please, Representative Lau.
Can I make a stab at that? I think that the part of the solution is on that heat map that was shown a few slides earlier, how incredibly productive our centers are and how we make them more so by making conditions support walking and biking. So we can increase, really milk that economic productivity out of those places. So I think, maybe it's a transition question in some way. Yeah, but it's good to start with a vision of where we're headed and how we can get there so that it's an easier sell for some that, this is towards this end. And kind of like the EV subsidies, we had to sort of support this initially to kind of get it off the ground with the idea that, eventually these things can become a bit more self-sustaining. So I would just encourage my colleagues to kind of think about it more holistically that way, because otherwise we're it's going to be a fight all the time.
And I think our goals are similar.
Yeah.
That's certainly what I was trying to portray, and I very much appreciated everybody get a chance to at least, if you go a couple more minutes, if you want to pop through any more of your highlights, and then we're going to have to adjourn for lunch.
I think also, to Representative Lally's suggestion, I think there's also a lot of revenue that's generated by this work that doesn't come into the T fund necessarily, right? We've got people coming here to recreate, people who are able to access jobs because of, this kind of infrastructure. So, and I think the discussion about how do we translate that into transportation money, I think is really important.
If you can help me in that direction, then I can help, we can help continue to help, I guess is what I'm, I'm not closing a door. I'm just trying to make sure that the understanding of where it's coming from. So this is a really popular topic. We have people that have schedule, and I am sorry to have to do this, but we're going to have to adjourn for this session of people's spot and respect their time and their commitment. I'm sorry that I have to do that.
One more slide.
I'm sorry. But I'm not, if you had one more piece, but otherwise, people have already.
The last thing was just emphasizing that the e-bike rebate program, super important program, helps low-income people access, an affordable means of transportation. We'd really love to see that supported.
Thank you very much.
Can I just?
Representative Burke, if you can make it quick.
That has really helped talk about income bike shops in downtowns. The ability to have people buy e-bikes has made a huge difference in the revenues of my local bike shop.
Yeah, great.
I'm just going to note the purchase and use tax also goes into the T fund, and it's not only people who drive who pay that. So just for that.
Excellent. We are.